Hello, I'm Christine Schiavone, and our show is Spiritual Exploration. Tonight, we're going to talk about Engaged Buddhism. And with me tonight to talk about Engaged Buddhism are my guests, Mary Myers and Joyce Leigh.
Hi.
Hello, ladies. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight, you are from the Rock Blossom Sangha in Brooklyn.
Yes.
Right. And you belong to this, it's like a group or a sort of a temple or something like that?
Yeah, Sangha is really, it just means community. And we called ourselves the Rock Blossom Sangha after
that's a nice name.
A bunch of discussion.
Yeah, okay, that's a nice name. I like it. I like it. All right, well, we're going to talk about Engaged Buddhism tonight, and we'll start out with the question, what is Engaged Buddhism?
For me, Engaged Buddhism is not being passive. One thinks of meditation in Buddhism as sort of sitting on a seat and contemplating one's navel, I think. But it's a lot more than that. And our spiritual leader, who is Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist who is of Vietnamese descent, has taught us that it's really important to bring the practices that we learn every week at the Sangha to life experiences. And that's my take on Engaged Buddhism, being engaged in your life.
Well, that's the way to be, I would think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good way to be. When you go to the Sangha, what do you do?
Well, we have a regular practice. Every week we meet on Sunday nights for 2 hours, and we start with a sitting meditation of 20 minutes. Right. And then we do a walking meditation where we walk around the circle where people are, where we've been sitting. We walk mindfully, sort of practicing paying attention to our walking. And then we do a second sitting meditation. And then we always have a reading that we read something of Thich Nhat Hanh 3 days out of the month, and then on the 4th Sunday we have a guest reading, something outside the tradition. Whoever is leading that night gets to choose. And then we discuss it. And then in the discussion, this is where actually our practice starts to differ from the practices of other forms of Buddhism, because people really bring their lives into the discussion. Like some people will bring in what they're dealing with a parent or with a child or with their work or whatever, and we bring our sort of mindfulness as a community to one another's lives. So it's sort of a little like a 12-step program, except without, you know, the reason for meeting.
Right.
So,
right. So in other words, people will
Yeah.
actually sit there and discuss their difficulties in life, and
Yes.
and will others in the group advise them, and or just listen to them and let them.
No, there's no cross-talking when somebody is sharing. However, if you want to approach the person, or if there's something that the person has brought up that reminds you of your practice or something that's happened in your practice, you could then bring that up when it's, you know, your turn, when you take a turn. And it takes a form, it's an interesting form, because we're just sitting there, and when somebody wants to speak, we bow, and it seems like everybody knows when someone else wants to speak. And when we're finished speaking, we bow. And we take a couple of seconds or maybe even a minute in between shares to let things soak in. And I know my practice has gotten stronger as a result of sharing, and the community that exists is remarkable, is very different than anything I've ever experienced with Buddhism. I've practiced other kinds of Buddhism, but this community of the Sangha it's the heart.
Really?
Yeah, it's the heart of the practice. And as recently as just a few months ago, we had a Sangha sister who passed away. She had brain cancer, right? And Mary took her 3 cats, and
You take care of each other.
we take care of each other, right.
And so which gives everyone a feeling of community, a feeling of belonging
Yeah,
and
exactly.
being cared for. That's a nice thing.
Yeah.
it
That
is.
really is a
It's very
nice thing.
special.
Well, there's a lot of similarities now among the different Buddhist ways of practicing, but there's some of them are the same as well, so such as the 5 precepts.
Yes.
So that is like universal, just like in Christianity, the 10 Commandments is universal. So that, and the 5 precepts basically boils down to everything the 10 Commandments tells Christians. So as a matter of fact, I have here, let's just go over the 5 precepts a second, okay?
Sure.
I undertake the precept, number 1, I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the killing of living beings. Now, that's just like thou shalt not kill.
Right.
Okay? But when they say of living beings, they mean everything, right?
Right.
Yeah, generally speaking, the interpretation in Buddhism is everything that's alive. And it's actually interesting because what Thai did, Thich Nhat Hanh, his nickname is Thai. It means teacher.
Okay.
And so what Thai did is he part of the process of Engaged Buddhism was he sort of recreated it for lay people. So it wasn't so focused on monastic life or so focused on meditation, but more like bringing it into each individual person's life in a way that is affirming and helpful directly in their life experiences. And so what he did with the precepts is he reframed them into what we call the 5 mindfulness trainings. And so it changes it a little bit because rather than saying don't kill anything, he created this context of saying aware of the suffering caused by killing.
Yeah.
I'm committed to finding ways not to kill. And so what it does is it changes the impulse from like following a rule that someone has said you shouldn't kill, instead to looking at what happens. And so it's a process that, say for example, you aren't a vegetarian and you continue to eat meat, which lots of Buddhists do. You're required to be aware of the suffering caused by what you're doing. It's not like you get to pretend it doesn't cause suffering.
Right.
So it's a way of being deeply engaged in the world however you're living it. So, and of course for many people, being aware of the effect of what they do does change their behavior, sometimes little by little, like you choose to eat less meat, or you choose to only eat certain kinds of meat, or meat that's been raised humanely, or eventually none, or maybe occasionally for what you feel is your health. Or so there's a way of practicing that brings it really back to the person.
I see.
So rather than telling you what to do, more like taking ownership of your life.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's nice.
And there's also, I remember the first time I had heard the 5 mindfulness trainings, I was saying in my Dharma sharing, God, how am I ever going to do this? You know, it seems so overwhelming. And I was taken aside by Mary, and she said, there is nothing involved in this that makes it a have to. This is something that's very personal, and you experience it slowly and personally. I mean, for example, right now, I am so in favor of disarmament or having peace in the world. We always
we all want
talk,
peace, of
right?
course.
Exactly. But how do we achieve that? Because war is in all of us, but peace is in all of us as well.
Sure.
And it's touching the peace part of it that I want to become have more growth with, and touching the peace. If I'm at peace with myself, then I'll be able to be at peace outside.
True.
With people outside of myself.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah. All right. So the first precept is not to kill. The second one is I undertake the precept to refrain from stealing. Okay. No killing, no stealing. That's good. The third one is I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. which includes adultery, rape, exploitation, etc. Now, they're not saying that sex is a bad thing. They're just saying not to get carried away, overdo it, do it in a wrongful way.
Exactly.
Right, and again, it's a mindfulness training. So what the mindfulness training says is, aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I endeavor to, all right, I'm committed to finding ways to basically do it healthily. So, you know, it's exactly that. If you're in a relationship in which it's like enhancing your life and the other's life, great.
But if you're hurting somebody with it or something, then
exactly.
I understand.
And there's no like rules for how you're hurting. Like sometimes, I mean, you know, you can be in a healthy relationship and have it becoming unhealthy.
Yeah.
And it maintains the responsibility of looking. Like one of the practices in Buddhism is looking deeply. And the idea is not just to look at the surface, but to continue to look and to continue to look and really understand as much as you can about what's going on, so that you can start to take apart the complicated things that we, you know, these situations that we create, and start to find ways to fix little things within them.
In other words, like, think about what you're doing before you do it, so that you can follow through, at least in your mind, with the outcome, and then see if it's going to be a good one or not, and then make your decision on what how you're going to handle the situation there.
Yeah, and also if you've done something, you know, to really look at how it happened, you know, to see what the circumstances that created this situation were, and to begin to understand the mechanism creating a situation, you know, so all of it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that recently happened to me was I was in dialogue with my youngest son, who was leaving to go to law school, and he was insistent on leasing a car. And in my vast experience as his mother, I wanted to say to him, are you sure that you've investigated everything and that you're getting the best deal that you can get for yourself?
Right.
And I started talking to him from that place of, I'm the mother, you're the lowly son, as opposed to, here's somebody who's just learning something new, and I've got to allow him to learn that new thing.
Yes.
And I stopped myself and I said, do you feel that you have gotten the best deal? And he said, yes. And I said, well, then I'm really confident that as a young man making a decision as a man, that you're doing the right thing. And whatever will come of it will then be something that he'll be able to learn from, as opposed to my learning experience or pushing my learning experience on him.
Well, you can give your learning experience, and if they want to learn from your experience, fine. Otherwise, if they have to fall flat on their face on their own, you got to let them do it too.
Right.
Right.
You give them the best you can as far as experience, and hope that they'll pick up on it. But if they don't, there's nothing you can do.
Right.
But just let them be and let them find out for themselves.
Yeah, and the mindfulness part of it is sort of looking at your own motivation. Like sometimes we're sort of on full throttle and we're doing habitual behavior. We call it habit energy. So you're acting out of habit energy. And so you're doing things and saying things, and at some point you might start to become like realizing you're maybe a little out of control. And what mindfulness training is for is at that point to take a breath and stop and, you know, check what the energy is, check what the emotional state is of your body, and check what you're thinking about this person in front of you. If you're thinking of them as being sort of, you know, stupid or weak, or, you know, and if that energy is present, to then stop, you know, and really let it be, to know that that's not the energy you wanted to bring into that situation.
But what if the person is stupid or weak?
Well, that's a challenge, right?
Anyway,
then they just get to be your mirror, right?
Okay, precept number 4. I undertake the precept to refrain from false speech or lying.
Right.
So in other words, we go back, we must tell the truth all the time. What if somebody asks you a question that if you tell them the truth, it might hurt them, or there's something that you can't tell them because you've been sworn to secrecy or something? What about something like that?
You know, that's great that you're asking this, because there was another, we had seen a film while this woman, Allison, was dying, and it was a film that was actually created by Ty, and he tells this story in this film about this ancient. This goes way back. This man was living a very righteous life, and he had embraced Buddhism, and everybody in his family but his son was embracing Buddhism. So one day he tells his son, "I'm not feeling well. Will you go for me to the temple, and just you don't have to stay very long, but bring back one little piece of information." Obviously lying to the son to get him to go to the temple. The son goes to the temple, comes back, and not only tells his father one thing, but was so bowled over by what he had heard over there, decides to embrace Buddhism, and they're all now a family that's practicing. We're talking hundreds of years, hundreds of thousands, right?
Probably thousands.
Years ago. And my first question was exactly yours. What are you talking about? We're not supposed to lie. Here's this guy. He's lying. And is that okay? Again, this is something that has to be meditated on, has to be looked at. There's the difference between being honest and brutally honest.
Really? Wow.
Right?
Well, and again, see, it's all the mindfulness training. So again, the mindfulness training says aware of the suffering caused by, I think it says unmindful speech. I will endeavor to. And so it's about looking deeply again. So honestly, if there are things that I could say to my mom that are going to really hurt her feelings, it's not my job to say them because they're truthful. Like my friend Karen calls that the truth police. Like you use truth to hurt other people. So if you look at that mindfully, eventually you start to notice how actually your intention might be to be hurtful. So it's about looking deeply. And it's just not about rules. It sounds like rules, but it's really not, because more and more, the more you look, you find that who you want to be and how you want to live and being in deep connection with other people really requires that you pay attention to these things. And so it stops being about rules and starts being about living,
Very good.
Yeah.
And the last precept, number 5, last but not least, I undertake the precept to refrain from intoxicants which lead to heedlessness. Does that mean I can't get drunk or something?
Yeah. Yeah, and again,
I don't think that's in the Ten Commandments, though.
Oh, yeah. No getting high.
Yeah, and we have a person who is a member of the Order of Interbeing, which is a step that neither of us has taken. It's a further step. And they also have, 14 mindfulness trainings, not 5. They're basically the same, though.
Yeah.
And they also have the intoxicants. And he actually made a point of explaining at one point that he had decided that for him, the way he was going to interpret that was that he was not going to drink to the point of intoxication, but that he was going to allow himself to have a glass of wine when he's at dinner with people.
Why not?
And again, this was his looking. He said, it doesn't hurt me and it doesn't hurt others. And I have heard other people say, well, you say that, but. And so the point is, there's no definitive answer. Everybody's on their own path and is responsible for their own behavior.
And it's not like you're going to go to hell or something if...
There's no hell to go to in Buddhism.
Right? If you kill somebody, maybe.
Even then, there's no hell in Buddhism. Well, in our form.
So basically, in a nutshell, the 5 precepts to Buddhism and engaged Buddhism especially are not to kill, not to steal, not to have sexual misconduct, not to lie, and not to get drunk. And if you're doing all those, or any other intoxicant.
Right.
And if you're doing all those things, then supposedly you're leading a good life, a good spiritual life.
Well, if you're practicing and you're practicing with sincerity, you're feeling good.
Yes.
You're feeling happy.
Right.
Your life feels meaningful. For example, the first mindfulness training, Thai, being a Vietnamese Buddhist, experienced the Vietnam War firsthand. I had many friends that went to Vietnam, never came back.
Yeah.
I was a big peace activist, and in our country at that time, it was a war that we were having right here.
Yeah, yeah, among ourselves, sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to go to Vietnam, you were looked at in a very bad way. If you didn't want to go to Vietnam, you were looked at in a very bad way.
And then when these poor guys came back, they were looked at in a very bad way.
They didn't get any honor.
Right,
and
right.
What Thai has shown us, and we're going to see some clips from a film.
You want to go into that?
Yeah, from a film that he had done where he was doing work with American Vietnam War veterans, and he said to them, "Don't concentrate on the 5 children that you killed 10 years ago. There are 5 children in your neighborhood today that need help."
Sure, sure.
It's not a disregard for
no, but that's done and over with, but you got to take care of what needs help now.
Right, exactly.
Right, I know.
And so instead of taking your energy and keeping it all bottled up and feeling badly
and guilty and all that.
And horrible, you know, for taking a human life.
Right.
I could not even imagine how anybody is trained to go into the military.
Right.
And here's somebody that's saying, please, let's prevent war. Let's teach each other to think in another way so that we won't have war. Because once you do have war, you're going to be creating generations of people who are going to carry on.
Carry that suffering.
That's right. You're absolutely right. All right. Well, let's have the first clip, and where we will see Thich Nhat Hanh, okay, and what he has to say.
Thich Nhat Hanh was born in 1926 in Vietnam, then part of French colonial Indochina. Thai, as he is known, grew up during a revival of Vietnamese Buddhism.
When I was 12 and 13, I had the opportunity to read and hear about Engaged Buddhism, the practice of Buddhism in our daily life, in our society. The word Engaged Buddhism was not used by that time, but the meaning was there. So I was motivated by that kind of desire, to apply Buddhism into our daily life, our society, and not just to practice Buddhism in the monastery. I became a novice at the age of 16, a little bit more than 16. And then the situation of Vietnam, the resistance against the French, the hunger that our people had to go through, the war, hunger, and political suppression, colonialism, these kind of sufferings call for action, call for practice in order for us to liberate ourselves. And the desire to shine the Buddhist insight on the situation was very strong. You know, during the war in Vietnam, I escaped death several times. First, we had a war with the French. I was a novice. I was something like 20-year-old. And that day, a French soldier came with his jeep. and he was looking for food, for rice. And he had a gun, and we monks, we only have our breathing in and out. We don't have anything else. You know, during that time, many monks and nuns supported the resistance against the French. So, and the French knew that. And we should be very careful, because many of my Dharma brothers and sisters were killed by the French because they supported the resistance movement.
In 1954, Vietnamese forces defeated the French, and Vietnam was temporarily partitioned. By 1960, fighting had broken out between the American-backed government of the South and the North Vietnamese-supported National Liberation Front.
During the war in Vietnam, we experienced that kind of practice called Engaged Buddhism. Suppose you are meditating in a meditation hall, and if you hear the bombs falling around, the meditation hall has not been hit by a bomb yet. You are safe. But since you are meditating, you are aware that the bombs are falling and destroying houses and people around the meditation hall. And you know that you cannot just continue to sit in the meditation hall. So you get out of meditation hall in order to help people. And that is called meditation in action. In a situation like the war in Vietnam, we had to learn to do both at the same time, meditating while acting in order to relieve the suffering. We need to do something in order to change the situation. And therefore, deep looking and deep acting is what we need. And deep looking is meditation. And deep acting is also meditation.
Wow, that was powerful.
He's something, isn't he?
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah.
I love the part where it said, and all we monks had was our breathing in and out. He said that the French general came and he had a gun, and all our monks had was the breathing in and out. And I'd like to talk about the breathing in and out.
Yeah,
when I first started meditating, it was in the practice was very similar to the practice that we do at the Sangha. However, I was working with a teacher who was teaching me from a man by the name of John Kabat-Zinn, who's a scientist who came from MIT,